Hi, Rama. It's week 17, day 3 of our Bible narrative reading plan. Today we're in 1 Samuel chapter 14. 1 Samuel 14 continues the story that began at the end of chapter 13, and it shows that battle. Remember that Saul was leading the children of Israel as they fought against the Philistines, and he was supposed to be waiting for Samuel, and he disobeyed. Well, as the troops were getting ready to leave, and some of them did leave, the story picks up with Saul rallying the troops and leading them into battle. But as they're preparing, unbeknownst to Saul, Jonathan is also at work. And so we see that even in this complicated chapter with more details than we can look at in this section, in this video, we see that Jonathan's also at work. And we see Jonathan really being contrasted with Saul, and Saul is not acting wisely. He's trying to rally the troops, but really Jonathan is the one that comes off well as being the wise leader, and that he's seeking to lead Israel in a helpful and meaningful way. But then we see that Saul makes this rash vow, and he tells them, "Cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged on my enemies." Notice he's not invoking God's name, that God destroys his enemies, that Saul's really making it about him. And again, maybe this is a way of rallying the troops, of saying, look, we're not even going to eat until we win this battle. And again, unknowns to Saul, Jonathan is at work and is helping bring about this victory. And so once the battle is all over, Saul has to deal with this vow that he's made. He finds out that Jonathan is the one who has actually eaten, has taken and eaten, even when Saul has made this pronouncement that no one is supposed to eat during this time. And so Saul says to Jonathan, "Tell me what you've done." Jonathan tells him, "I tasted a little honey with the tip of my staff that was in my hand. Here I am. I will die." Jonathan is willing to take the consequences of what has happened, even though this is a foolish thing that Saul has done, making this vow. And Saul seems like he's ready to go through with it. He says, "God, do so to me and more also. You shall surely die, Jonathan." He's saying, look, I have to keep this vow. You're going to have to die, son. But then the people cry out. The people say, "Oh, no, you're not going to do that. Shall Jonathan die, the one who has worked this great salvation in Israel?" Jonathan's really the one who's been leading them well, not Saul. And this whole episode reminds us that Saul is a rash and angry leader, vile and violent leader in many ways. And the people say, "Far from it, as the Lord lives, there shall not be one hair of his head that falls to the ground, for he has worked with God this day." The people recognize what Jonathan has done, even if Saul seems to not recognize it. And the text says something interesting. It says, "So the people ransomed Jonathan." This idea of ransom ought to be causing us to think about how Christ has ransomed us. It says, "Israel ransomed Jonathan so that he did not die. And Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place." And the chapter ends really with almost an administrative summary. It's kind of giving us a summary account of what is going on in Saul's reign as king. And chapter 15 is going to repeat this idea the second time that Saul is rejected. So we saw that in chapter 13, we see it in 15, and right here in the middle of 14, we see this reminder that Saul is not the king that Israel needs. It's the king they wanted, but it's not the one they need. This episode reminds us that he is a weak and poor leader. Here's a summary of today's reading. For more information, go to tunemyheart.org.